The red and blue lights pulsed through the quiet suburban night, splashing across the faded siding of my house and glinting off the amber glass of my half-empty IPA bottle. I stood on my front porch, barefoot on the cool wood, squinting at the two police officers lingering on my lawn. They looked as baffled as I felt, shifting their weight awkwardly in their stiff uniforms. One of them, a stocky guy with a buzz cut, cleared his throat and scratched at the back of his neck. Sir, we got a call about illegally consuming alcohol." I blinked, the absurdity of it hitting me like a slap. "Illegally consuming alcohol?" I repeated, holding up the bottle as if it might explain itself. The other officer, taller and wiry with a faint smirk tugging at his lips, nodded. "Yeah, that's what the report says. Neighbor claims alcohol's banned on this street." And just like that, I knew who was behind it. Margaret Voss, the self-appointed dictator of Willow Creek Lane, the woman who'd made it her mission to turn my life into a suburban nightmare ever since I'd rolled into this neighborhood 6 weeks ago. She'd glared at me from her pristine porch when I'd left my MOVYing boxes curbside for an hour too long, her pinched face radiating disapproval. Last week, she'd corner me by my mailbox, her arms folded so tight I thought her sweater might rip, and declared in that shrill, sanctimonious tone of hers that drinking alcohol even on my own damn property was against the rules. I chuckled then, assuming it was a bad joke. No one could be that delusional, right? Wrong. Here I was, staring down two cops while my beer grew warm in my hand. I sighed, gesturing toward the wicker chair on my porch. "So, if I sit right there, 3 feet back, inside my property line, it's legal." The officers exchanged a glance, the shorter one rubbing his jaw. Yeah. Technically," he said, his tone laced with the exhaustion of someone who'd clearly dealt with Margaret's nonsense before. "We're good either way, sir. We just have to check out every call that comes in." Before I could respond, a voice sliced through the night like a banshee's wail. "Are you seriously letting him get away with this?" Margaret stormed across the street, her floral bathrobe flapping around her like a cape, her face twisted into a mask of righteous fury. She jabbed a finger at me, then at the officers. "I called you. I'm the head of the HOA. This is my neighborhood." The cops turned back to me, and I swear I saw the taller one bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. "Sir," he said, nodding toward Margaret, "we're going to head out now. Try not to break any more. Non-existent laws." Margaret gasped, clutching her chest like she'd been stabbed. "Non-existent? Non-existent? How dare you disrespect the HOA?" I swallowed a grin as the officers retreated to their cruiser, shaking their heads. The second they peeled away, Margaret wheeled on me, her eyes blazing. "You are defying the HOA. I will not tolerate insubordination." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my beer. Her left eye twitched. I took another. She let out a sound that could have shattered glass, a high-pitched screech that echoed down the street before stomping back to her house and slamming the door, so hard her tacky, live, laugh, love wreath crashed to the ground. I exhaled, sinking into my porch chair, thinking maybe that'd be the end of it. I was dead wrong. The next morning, a neon yellow notice was plastered on my front door, the kind of garish color that screams petty vengeance. In bold red letters, it read, "You are in violation of HOA policy. Immediate action required." Below that, in Margaret's jagged, furious handwriting, "Alcohol is strictly prohibited in this neighborhood. I will be reporting your refusal to comply to the HOA board. Consider this your final warning." I snorted, peeling the paper off and crumpling it into a ball. Final warning? For what? I grabbed the HOA handbook from the stack of mail I'd been ignoring since MOVYing in and flipped through it. Pages of tedious rules about grass height, paint colors, and noise levels, but not a single word about alcohol. Nothing. I glanced across the street at Margaret's house. Her curtains twitched. She was watching me, waiting for my next move. I grinned. If she wanted a war, she'd just fire the first shot. That weekend, I decided to escalate. Not only did I crack open another beer on my porch, but I called up my buddy Jake, a laid-back guy who'd grown up in this town and knew all its quirks. He showed up with a cooler stuffed with IPAs and a mischievous grin. Heard you've got a tyrant problem, he said, tossing me a bottle. We clinked them together, laughing loud enough to make sure Margaret heard every word. It took less than 5 minutes for her front door to burst open like a cannon shot. I will not tolerate this, she shrieked, stomping across the street, her phone clutched like a weapon. She waved it in my face, her cheeks flushed an alarming shade of red. You think this is funny? The HOA has strict policies. You're breaking a rule. I leaned back in my chair, stretching lazily. Actually, Margaret, I checked the handbook. No rule against drinking on my own property. Her face darkened. I am the HOA. If I say it's a rule, it's a rule. I smiled, taking an exaggerated sip. That's not how laws work. Her hands balled into fists, trembling with rage. I'm calling the HOA president, she spat. Good, I said, nodding. Let's clear this up once and for all. She stormed off, vanishing in her house like a hurricane retreating to regroup. Jake nudged me, smirking. Dude, she's gonna lose her mind. She already has, I replied, and we clinked bottles again. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email from Richard Delaney, the official HOA president guy I'd never met, but whose name carried the weight of someone who'd been roped into this mess against his will. The subject line, formal hearing request continued violations. I laughed, forwarding it to my lawyer friend, Tom, with a quick note. This is getting good. His reply came instantly. Oh, this is going to be fun. The next morning, as I backed out of my driveway for work, I spotted something new in Margaret's yard. A hand-painted sign, the letters scrawled in black and red like a manifesto born of rage. Alcohol-free community. Respect the HOA or face consequences. I shook my head, barely containing my amusement. She wasn't backing down, and neither was I. If she thought she could ban alcohol by sheer force of will, she'd seriously underestimated me. That night, the VY Deo hit the internet. I'd recorded Margaret's meltdown over my beer as a joke, uploading it to X with the caption, "Meet my HOA dictator." I figured a few friends would laugh and move on. By morning, my phone was a war zone of notifications, tens of thousands of VYUs, then hundreds of thousands. Comments poured in. This lady's unhinged. Reminds me of my old HOA nightmare. Someone even remixed Margaret's screech into a techno beat that had me snorting coffee all over my porch. The internet dubbed her Margaret the Mad overnight, and suddenly I was the reluctant hero of a suburban uprising. But Margaret wasn't done. At noon, a sharp knock rattled my door. I opened it to find a man in a stiff gray suit, clipboard in hand, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. Good afternoon, sir. I'm Richard Delaney, HOA president. We need to talk. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, Margaret? He sighed a long, weary sound. A mandatory HOA hearing. Actually, we've received complaints about me drinking a beer and VY OLADing guidelines. I asked, smirking. He nodded, flipping through his clipboard. According to Margaret, there's a strict no-alcohol policy. I leaned against the doorframe. Cool. Show me where that's written. Richard hesitated, skimming the handbook. After a long, awkward silence, he admitted, well, there isn't one. Not officially. I gave him a slow nod. Thought so. He pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly over it. Look, man, between you and me, Margaret's a nightmare. She's been pushing this alcohol ban for months, but the board keeps rejecting it because it's insane. That said, she's demanding a hearing about your disrespect. I have to follow through. I shrugged. Fine. Let's do it. The hearing was scheduled for the next Saturday. In the meantime, Margaret went full scorched earth. The following day, I stepped outside to find my driveway buried under a blizzard of yellow VY olation notices, dozens of them, fluttering in the breeze. Unapproved lawn decorations, I didn't own any. Failure to comply with aesthetic standards, whatever that meant. Disrupting the community with inflammatory BHA VY, or, translation, I wouldn't kiss her ring. I laughed, peeling them off one by one and tossing them in the trash. Across the street, Margaret stood on her porch, arms crossed, a smug smile plastered on her face. You can't fight the HOA, she called. I grinned. You sure about that? She huffed, and disappeared inside. This wasn't just about beer Anna Maria, it was about her warped need to control everything and everyone. What else would she try if I let this slide? That's when inspiration struck, a beautifully petty, perfectly legal idea. I dug into the HOA regs and found a loophole. No rules banned alcohol outright, just public displays. It was a technicality begging to be exploited. I ordered a clear plastic tin online, had it delivered overnight, and spent Friday night setting it up in my backyard fully enclosed, technically private, and VY-sible from every angle. Then I sent in VY-Tez to the entire neighborhood for a prohibition reenactment party. The response was instant and overwhelming. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Margaret had terrorized. By Saturday evening, my yard was packed neighbors I'd never met laughing, clinking drinks, reveling in their defiance. Mid-party, Margaret stormed over, red-faced, and practically VY bratting with rage. "This is a direct violation of HOA rules," she shrieked. I leaned against the tent's entrance, sipping a beer. "Actually, it's not. This is a private structure legal under HOA guidelines." Her eye twitched violently. "You're mocking the HOA." I shrugged. "No, just working within the rules." She let out a strangled howl and whipped out her phone. "I'm calling the cops." I smiled. "Cool. Let's see if they care about a historically themed party in a compliant enclosure." She stomped off, fuming. When the cops arrived 20 minutes later, they took one look at the setup, listened to Margaret's unhinged rant, and turned to me. "This all legal?" one asked. "Yep," I said, handing him the handbook page I printed. He skimmed it, then grinned. "Any extra beers?" Margaret's jaw dropped as the officers grabbed drinks and left, warning her about false reports. She stood there, seething, watching her power crumble. The next morning, a new banner stretched across her yard. "Alcohol is destroying this community. Respect the rules or leave." Below it, a fake official notice claimed non-compliant homeowners could face expulsion. I rubbed my eyes, half-con VY, and said I was hallucinating. Expulsion? She'd lost it completely. By noon, a city inspector named Mr. Lawson showed up, clipboard in hand, explaining he was there to re-VYEW reported infractions. I knew who'd called him. He inspected my property lawn, porch, Tintan found nothing. "Shocking," I said, dripping sarcasm. "But since I'm here," he added, "I need to check the complainant's property too." I grinned. "Oh, that's going to be fun." We crossed the street together. Margaret greeted us with a triumphant smirk. "I assume you're here to handle him," she said, jerking her chin at me. Lawson shook his head. "No, ma'am. I need to inspect your property for compliance." Her confidence faltered. My property? Within 10 minutes, Lawson had a list: an unpermitted deck, a shed VY, OLADing setbacks, shoddy electrical work. Serious fines loomed. Margaret's smugness evaporated. "This is harassment," she shrieked. Lawson didn't flinch. "No, ma'am. Routine inspection." I watched, arms crossed, as she unraveled. She spun on me. "This is your fault." I shrugged. "You wanted the city involved. You got it." For the first time, she looked broken. Lawson left, and she retreated inside without a word. Days passed, then weeks no notices, no screeches, no cops. I threw a VY Tory barbecue, inviting everyone. The turnout was massive, the neighborhood alive with laughter and music. Even the cops swung by not for Margaret, but for burgers. As the night wound down, I glanced at her dark house. A sliver of light peeked through the blinds, and there it was, the faint outline of a wine glass. I grinned. So much for her alcohol-free crusade. She'd lost, and I'd won. Cheers to that. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this VY Deo with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next VY Deo.